Before we talk about overcoming negative feelings, we need to understand why they exist. Because if we don't understand the root, we'll keep trying to fix the fruit when the real work is beneath the surface. Negative emotions, fear, doubt, anxiety, insecurity, are not random. They don't just show up out of nowhere. See, when fear rises in you, it's not just fear, it's a message. It's telling you something about what you believe, about yourself, about your future, about God. When you feel anxiety creeping in, it's not just a feeling, it's an indicator. It's pointing to the areas where trust has been replaced with worry. And when you start doubting yourself, that's not just self-doubt. It's a reflection of an internal battle between who God says you are and who your fears say you are. The problem is, most of us treat these feelings as if they are the truth. We feel afraid, so we assume we are in danger. We feel unworthy, so we assume we are unworthy. We feel like we are alone, so we assume that God has left us. But feelings are not facts. They are information. And if we start seeing them as information rather than identity, we can take power over them instead of letting them take power over us. Have you ever noticed how loud negativity gets when you are close to something great? The moment you are stepping into something new, fear shows up. The moment you start believing in yourself, doubt comes knocking. The moment you decide to walk by faith, insecurity whispers, "Are you sure?" That's not a coincidence. That's an attack. Because the enemy of your soul knows that if he can get in your head, he can keep you from stepping into the fullness of what God has for you. So let's talk about what happens internally. Most people think that the real battle is external, that their biggest struggle is what's happening around them. But the real battle is within. It's the conversation happening in your mind. It's the war between fear and faith. The difference between someone who lives in fear and someone who walks in courage is not that one has fear and the other doesn't. The difference is that one has learned how to answer fear when it speaks. David said in the Psalms, "Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God." Do you see what's happening here? David is talking to himself. He is not just letting his emotions dictate his reality. He is taking charge of the conversation. That's what we have to do. When fear says you are not enough, you have to answer back. God says, "I am fearfully and wonderfully made." When anxiety says you don't know what's next, you have to answer back, "I don't have to know. I trust the one who does." Some of you have been living in a narrative that was never yours to carry. You have been defining yourself by how you feel instead of by what God says. And I get it. Feelings are strong. They can be overwhelming, but they are not the foundation we stand on. The Word of God is. And the truth is, when God is with you, you are never as weak as you feel. You are never as lost as you think. You are never as alone as it seems. Here's what I need you to know. God is not intimidated by your emotions. He is not scared of your doubt. He is not walking away because you are struggling. No, he leans in closer. He is near to the brokenhearted. He is present in the struggle. And the very thing you think is disqualifying you, the doubt, the fear, the insecurity, is the very thing that God wants to heal, redeem, and use for his glory. So if you are in a season where negativity feels loud, where fear feels heavy, where doubt feels constant, don't run from it. Confront it. Ask yourself, what is this fear trying to tell me? Where have I stopped trusting God? Where have I started listening to lies instead of truth? Because once you identify the root, you can change the fruit. And this is why faith is so powerful. Because faith is not the absence of negative feelings. Faith is choosing to believe that God is greater than what you feel. Faith is looking fear in the face and saying, "I hear you, but I don't believe you." Faith is standing firm when everything in you wants to run. If you can shift your perspective and start seeing your negative emotions as signals rather than sentences, you'll start to realize that every attack on your mind is actually proof that something powerful is on the other side. The enemy wouldn't fight you this hard if you weren't a threat. He wouldn't try to discourage you if you weren't carrying something valuable. He wouldn't try to make you feel alone if God wasn't right there with you. So the next time negativity starts rising up in you, don't just sit in it, challenge it, interrogate it, replace it with truth. Because when God is with you, no feeling has the power to define you. Only He does. One of the greatest weapons of negativity is isolation. Have you ever noticed how much louder fear gets when you're alone? How much more convincing doubt sounds when you're by yourself? It's because negative emotions thrive in silence. They grow in the spaces where we feel unseen, unheard, and disconnected. And if the enemy can make you feel like you're alone, he can make you believe anything. Because when you feel alone, it's easy to believe that no one understands. It's easy to believe that no one sees you, that no one cares, that no one is coming to help. And once that thought takes root, it starts to shape your reality. It begins to dictate your decisions. It convinces you to withdraw, to shut people out, to keep your struggles to yourself. And the more you isolate, the more those lies sound like the truth. But here's what I need you to understand. Just because you feel alone doesn't mean you are alone. Feelings are deceptive. They don't always tell the truth. They only tell the story that your mind is rehearsing. And if the story you've been telling yourself is that no one is with you, that no one sees you, that God has left you, then of course, that's what you'll feel. But the truth is that God has never left. The truth is that He has been there in every moment, in every tear, in every silent battle you never told anyone about. You see, when God is with you, there is no such thing as being truly alone. You may be by yourself in a room, but you are never without His presence. You may feel misunderstood by people, but you are fully known by Him. And that changes everything, because when you know who is with you, fear loses its grip. When you know who walks beside you, doubt begins to shrink. When you know that the Creator of the universe is for you, suddenly everything that once seemed impossible becomes possible. And yet, even knowing that, some of us still struggle. Not because we don't believe in God, but because we've allowed life to convince us that He is distant. We look at our situation and assume that if God were with us, we wouldn't be struggling like this. We assume that if He truly cared, He would have fixed it by now. But let me challenge that thinking. Because nowhere in the Word does God promise that His presence means the absence of struggle. What He promises is that His presence means you will never have to struggle alone. Think about the disciples. There was a moment when they were in a boat and a storm hit. And even though Jesus was right there with them, they panicked. They feared for their lives. They thought the storm would destroy them, even though the Son of God was in the boat with them. And when Jesus woke up, He didn't say, "Oh, I understand why you're afraid." No, He said, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Because fear only has power when you forget who is with you. How many times have we done the same? How many times have we been in the middle of a storm and allowed fear to convince us that we're alone? But God is saying the same thing to us. Do you still have no faith? Don't you know that I'm with you? Don't you know that I will never leave you nor forsake you? That I am your refuge, your strength, your ever-present help in times of trouble. When you know that God is with you, you walk differently. You speak differently. You stop letting your circumstances define your confidence. You stop letting your emotions dictate your identity. Because confidence is not about what you have, it's about who you have. And if God is for you, who can be against you? Some of you have been praying for answers, praying for clarity, praying for a sign. And this is your sign. God is saying, I've been here the whole time. You were never alone. I've been speaking, but fear has been louder. I've been guiding, but doubt has been blinding. I've been present, but you've been too convinced of your isolation to recognize it. But today, that changes. Because today, you get to make a decision. Will you continue to believe the lie that you are alone? Or will you choose to believe the truth that God is with you? Because the moment you choose truth over feelings, you break the cycle. The moment you decide that his presence is greater than your fear, you silence the enemy's voice. And the moment you fully trust that you are never alone, you become unstoppable. So let this be the moment where the lie loses its power. Let this be the moment where fear no longer has control. Let this be the moment where you declare with full confidence, I am not alone. God is with me. And because he is with me, I will not be shaken. Negative feelings often come from the questions we ask ourselves. Have you ever noticed how much of our fear, anxiety, and doubt is rooted in the words, what if? What if I fail? What if they leave? What if I'm not good enough? What if everything falls apart? The mind loves to run in circles, feeding off worst case scenarios, convincing us that every risk will end in disaster. And the more we dwell on what if, the more we paralyze ourselves from moving forward. But there is a shift that changes everything. A shift from what if to even if. Even if things don't go as planned, God is still in control. Even if people walk away, God is still faithful. Even if I don't see the outcome yet, I trust that he is working all things together for my good. This shift is where faith is activated, because faith is not just believing when everything is going right. Faith is standing firm when nothing makes sense. It's easy to have faith when doors are opening, when prayers are being answered, when everything is flowing the way you imagined. But real faith is tested in the waiting, in the silence, in the uncertainty. Real faith is when you're standing in the middle of the unknown and choosing to say, even if I don't understand this, I still trust him. And that kind of faith confuses the enemy, because the enemy's goal is to make your trust in God conditional. He wants you to believe in God only when things are good, only when you get what you want, only when life is comfortable. But faith is not a transaction, it's a posture. It's a way of living that says, no matter what comes my way, my confidence is in God alone. Look at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were about to be thrown into a fiery furnace, and when faced with death, they didn't ask, what if we die? What if God doesn't save us? Instead, they declared, even if he does not rescue us, we will not bow. Do you see the shift? Their faith was not in the outcome, it was in the character of God. They knew that whether or not God delivered them, he was still God. And that is the place of unshakable confidence. Too often, we let fear determine our obedience. We wait for guarantees before we step out. We wait for clarity before we trust. We wait for everything to make sense before we say yes to what God is calling us to do. But what if God is asking you to step before you see? What if he is calling you to trust him, not because you have proof of the outcome, but because you have proof of his faithfulness? What if your next breakthrough is on the other side of a simple decision to say, even if I don't know what's next, I know God is already there. And let's be honest, the shift is not easy. It requires unlearning years of fear-based thinking. It requires undoing the habit of overanalyzing every possibility, of needing full control before moving forward. It requires surrender, and surrender is hard when you've been taught that survival depends on your ability to figure everything out. But the truth is, we were never meant to carry that weight. We were never meant to rely on our own strength, our own plans, our own ability to predict the future. God never asked us to have all the answers. He only asked us to trust the one who does. This is why Jesus said, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. He wasn't saying that life will be easy. He wasn't saying that things wouldn't go wrong. He was saying, even if you don't see the full picture, you can trust that your Father in heaven does. Worry will never add anything to your life. Fear will never prevent pain. It only prevents peace. And doubt will never change the outcome. It only changes your posture in the process. So what would happen if today you decided to let go of the what if and embrace the even if? What would happen if you stopped letting fear dictate your faith and started letting faith dictate your fear? What would happen if you fully surrendered? Not just when it's easy, but when it's uncomfortable, when it's uncertain, when it requires you to believe beyond what you can see. Because here's the truth. The moment you shift from what if to even if, you take the power back. You silence the voice of fear. You disarm the lies of the enemy, and you step into a level of trust that makes you unstoppable, because no matter what happens next, you already know the outcome. God is in control, and that is enough. And that is enough. Faith is not passive. It's not just a feeling. It's not just a prayer whispered in desperation, waiting for something to change. Faith is movement. Faith requires action. Too often we think overcoming negative feelings is about sitting still, waiting for them to pass, hoping that one day we'll wake up and the fear, the doubt, the heaviness will just be gone. But that's not how faith works. When God told the Israelites to step into the promised land, he didn't remove every obstacle before they got there. He didn't part the Jordan River while they stood on the shore, waiting for a sign. The waters only moved when they stepped in. It was their action, rooted in faith, that made a way where there was none. And for many of us, that's the missing piece. We're waiting for the fear to go away before we move. We're waiting to feel strong before we step. We're waiting to have all the answers before we obey. But God is saying, move first, and I will meet you there. Negative emotions love stagnation. Fear grows in hesitation. Doubt thrives in indecision. Anxiety increases when we sit in the same cycle, playing the same worries over and over in our minds, waiting for a miracle, but refusing to move toward it. And that's why the enemy wants to keep you stuck. If it can keep you questioning instead of trusting, if it can keep you overanalyzing instead of obeying, if it can keep you passive instead of active, then he can keep you from everything God has called you to be. This is why action matters, because every time you take a step forward in faith, you weaken the grip of fear. Every time you move despite how you feel, you remind your emotions that they don't have the final say. Every time you choose to do the thing that insecurity told you weren't capable of, you take back territory the enemy tried to steal. And the more you move, the smaller fear becomes. Think about Peter. When he saw Jesus walking on water, he didn't just sit in the boat hoping to be rescued from his doubt. He stepped out. Was the storm still there? Yes. Was the water still unpredictable? Yes. But he moved anyway. And for a moment, as long as his eyes were fixed on Jesus, he did the impossible. He walked on what should have drowned him. He defied the very thing that should have taken him under. And that's what happens when faith turns into action. You don't wait for the storm to stop before you walk. You walk in the middle of it. You don't wait for the fear to disappear before you believe. You believe while you're still afraid. Because faith is not the absence of fear. It's choosing to move anyway. Some of us have been stuck in the same place for too long. We've been waiting for confirmation when God already gave us the word. We've been waiting for the fear to subside when God is calling us to step despite it. And the longer we wait, the more we convince ourselves that we're not ready. But what if ready isn't a feeling? What if ready is simply the decision to trust? Because the truth is, transformation doesn't happen in your comfort zone. Breakthrough doesn't happen when you play it safe. Healing doesn't happen if you never move beyond the same patterns that keep you bound. And if you're waiting for the negative feelings to leave before you take action, you'll be waiting forever. Because the enemy will always give you another reason to wait, another excuse to stay put, another lie to keep you still. But if you refuse to let fear dictate your steps, if you refuse to let anxiety keep you from purpose, if you decide today that faith is stronger than feeling, then nothing can stop you. This is why James said, faith without works is dead, because faith that doesn't move isn't faith at all. It's just an idea. But real faith, faith that changes things, requires action. It requires stepping when you don't see the full picture. It requires speaking life when everything around you looks like death. It requires showing up when everything in you wants to hide. It requires praying for a door and then actually walking through it when it opens. So what is God calling you to do that fear has been trying to stop? What have you been delaying, waiting for the perfect moment, when the truth is the perfect moment is the one where you decide to move? Because you don't need to have everything figured out to take the first step. You just need to trust that the same God who called you is the same God who will sustain you. And if he is with you, then no fear, no doubt, no negative feeling can hold you back.